time in the wilderness and have been tested in the wilderness, or like the people of Israel, they tested God. So the time in the wilderness, especially in the book of Numbers and Exodus, as we've seen, shows how actually the people provoked God's anger. They tested God. Now, here we are introduced to let's say, a new character. Not only the Spirit leads Jesus to the wilderness, and we understand by that is the Spirit of God. So there is a purpose in that. God Himself is leading Jesus to the wilderness for this experience. But we are introduced to the devil. So he would be tempted by the devil, who is later called Satan in this passage. So we have a little different situation here, in the sense that we have the devil tempting Jesus, the Son of God. So this also teaches some experience. And the first amazing thing that we hear here is that the wilderness experience wasn't only didn't only occur with the people of God, but with Jesus Himself. Jesus Himself goes through this situation. So I want to note at least two things here. Is first, there are the areas in which Jesus was tempted. Three areas in which Jesus was tempted by the devil. And the second thing I want to note is, what was the purpose of this? Why was Jesus, the Son of God, tempted by the devil in the desert? Wasn't He the Son of God? Who did He have to prove to that He was the Son of God? Why did He have to be led by the Spirit to the wilderness to be tempted by the devil? So, first, I want to note, that the three areas in which Jesus was tempted. First, it says that He was led to the wilderness and He was tempted, and He was tempted for 40 days and 49 nights. He fasted during all this time, and after he was finished, of course, he was hungry. And the devil says like this, well, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. Who wouldn't want to eat something after 40 days, 40 nights fasting? How tempting it is to, well, yes, I have the power. I'm the Son of God. I can turn these stones into bread, and I can eat as much as I want. So the first area in which the devil tempts Jesus is in his basic basic needs. Jesus was hungry, and He could easily, as Son of God, transform those stones into bread and eat that bread. This is something that shows how it's the temptation is easily can easily catch us in some basic daily need. The second area in which Jesus is tempted is in His faith and trust in God. The devil now quotes a passage of Scripture. He says, so, if you're the Son of God, throw yourself down, he had taken Jesus to the pinnacle of the temple. He said, well, throw yourself down. As a matter of fact, doesn't the scripture say that he will command his angels concerning you? And also it says that on their hands they will bear you up so that you will not dash your foot against the stone. It's written in the scripture. It's a promise from God. So there you go. Don't you believe that? Doesn't God, your God, is your God the God that will command your angels to carry you? Satan is quoting from Psalm 91, verses 11 through 12, which says exactly this, except that he is partly right. He's right because Scripture does say this. But he quotes this in a completely different context. It is indeed a promise from God. If you read Psalm 91, Psalm 91 speaks of God's presence and how he will shelter you and he will be close to you and he will deliver you. But Satan is turning this into a test. Okay, let's say if God is really God. Let's say if you can, let's see if you can trust this God. In other words, he's putting into question God himself, God's providence. He's questioning God's promises. In other words, he's putting into question Jesus' trust in this God. Not only trusting in his God, his Father, but in God himself. God is able to do that. The third area in which Jesus is tested is in his own power. The devil says, he showed from a very high mountain, he showed Jesus the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, and he said to him, all these I will give you, if you will fall down and worship. In other words, he was offering Jesus power over all the kingdoms, glory. And he's saying, I'll give this all to you. Just one thing. Just worship. Don't worship the Father. Don't worship God. Worship me. And I'll give you all this to you. What's the problem with that? In a sense, you can say, well, that's exactly what God ended up doing. Jesus became, king, Messiah, promised Messiah. What's the problem with this? Problem, well, first is, problem is because it's a big lie. Satan was not going to make Jesus the owner, the king of all the universe, of course, because it didn't belong to him. Start with. But the problem is that this is a big contrast to the way of God and to God's dealing with Jesus, the Son. Why? Because in Satan's way, there was no cross, no death, no suffering, and no resurrection. It was a shortcut. I'll give you all this that you can see, and you just worship. You're not going to have to face death. You're not going to have to face the suffering of the cross. You're not going to be buried. And this seems to be very, very attractive. Proposal. Very interesting proposal. Wow. Can Can I be, the all-powerful, all-almighty, not having to go through all this suffering? Seems to be an excellent proposal. Well, we know from Genesis that this is a big lie. That's basically what the serpent said to man and woman. Look, you're going to become like gods. If you take this from this fruit, you're going to be like gods. You're going to know good and evil. As a matter of fact, you're going to be able to decide whatever you want to do. You're not going to have a God to be accountable to. You're going to be your God yourself. This was the proposal from the beginning. Now, how does Jesus respond to these tempting proposals? First, he quotes Scripture. The passages that Jesus quotes here are from Deuteronomy 6 and 8. And these passages, Moses is recalling the experience of the people of Israel in the wilderness. So he has all to do with the wilderness experience in the Old Testament. The first answer, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. It's in Deuteronomy 8. Moses says, remember the long way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, in order to humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commandments. He humbled you by letting you hunger, then by feeding you with the manna with which neither you nor your ancestors were acquainted, in order to make you understand that one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. So this answer of Jesus goes back to the experience of people in the wilderness in the Old Testament, and to the significance of that time in the desert. Basically, God was testing them so they would trust in God's providence, in God's guidance. The second answer comes from Deuteronomy 6. The answer is, he will. The answer is again. It's written, verse 7 in Matthew 4. Do not put the Lord your God to the test. Has to do with the wilderness experience also. By the way, this chapter 6 comes from what is known as the Shema. Shema is, hear, O Israel, Lord your God, only God, and so on. This is chapter 6. And these verses 15 through 16 says, because the Lord your God, who is present with you, is a jealous God, the anger of the Lord your God will be kindled against you, and he will destroy you from the face of the earth. Do not put the Lord your God to the test, as you tested him at Massah. So again, Jesus is referring to his experience in the desert, and he brings back these scripture texts to remind himself or to confront Satan, saying, "Wait a second. Okay, if you can quote scripture, I can quote too, and I can quote the correct way, and I'll say, what is scripture actually say about this?" And then Jesus' third answer is, worship the Lord your God and serve only him. Then the devil left. It's based in Deuteronomy, again, chapter 6, verse 13 to 14. The Lord your God you shall fear. Him you shall serve, and by his name alone you shall swear. Do not follow other gods. any of the gods of the people who are all around you. Jesus says, worship the Lord your God and serve only Him. Satan could bear this idea of worshiping only God. The desert experience, as we have mentioned before in Sundays, leads to doubts, confusion, disorientation. And here it leads to doubts about God, about His promises, even about His Word. Ultimately, temptation is an attempt to question our relationship with God. The devil is saying, if you are the Son of God, it's the man. If you're the Son of God, if you're the daughter of God, why can't you do this or that? Why are you in this or that situation? It puts to question our relationship with God, or God's fatherhood, the fact that we are children of God. It puts to question Jesus' sonship. You're the Son of God. Why can't you do this? You're the Son of God. Of course you can. And if you can't, God Himself, He wouldn't abandon you. He wouldn't abandon His child. He would do something. He would send His angels. Ultimately, the temptation is a question of our relationship with God. Even Jesus Himself is put to test. Interestingly, if you go back to chapter 3 and verse 17 in Matthew, the last verse before the temptation is Jesus' baptism. And at His baptism, a voice came from heaven saying, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." So you're reading Matthew and you just heard this voice from heaven saying, "This is my Son." Next scene, Satan is saying, "Okay, fine, are you the Son of God? Okay, let's see if you're the Son of God." So it's putting into question Jesus' baptism in the voice that came from heaven. Very often in our wilderness experiences, our relationship to God is put to test. Sometimes we ourselves question. We ourselves wonder, is God God indeed? Is God Father? I've heard recently from a couple that was going through a hard time, lost a newborn baby, and I heard the problem is, why did God do this to us? My father, her father was there. My father wouldn't do that to me. What God, my father, does this to me? So when we are in our wilderness moments or experiences, we question. We question our relationship to God or God's God's relationship to us. So the second thing I want to note is, what's the purpose of this? Well, didn't we just hear a voice from heaven saying, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased"? Why did Jesus have to go through this temptation in the wilderness? Okay, we're humans. We're finite. It's okay God putting us Thirdly, God putting the people of Israel to test. Jesus, wasn't he just baptized? Wasn't he just confirmed as the Son, beloved, in whom I'm well pleased? What's the purpose? There are at least two things in this story that does connect us to this experience in the Old Testament. I mean, besides the ones that I've already mentioned in the text. For one is, Jesus is tempted for 40 days. He was fasting for 40 days. This is, of course, an allusion to the 40 years of the people of Israel in the desert. Second thing is, like I said, the scripture quoted comes from Deuteronomy, which is a clear allusion to the experience of the people of Israel. So what's the meaning of the temptation? For one, it obviously parallels Jesus to Israel. But Israel, in a sense, faith. Jesus is the Son of God, who, in a sense, is put through the same test that anybody else. So let's say Jesus is the Son of God. He doesn't have to go through all this. He doesn't have to go through temptation. He doesn't have to go through the cross. And you may say, well, of course he's the Son of God. He's not human. He's never going to understand me because he's not human. He didn't go through what I go through. And how is he going to understand me? So, in a sense, we see Jesus in his humanity as the Son of God. He's going through any temptation, any testing as anybody else. As the people of Israel in the Old Testament. But differently from the people of Israel, Jesus succeeds. He resists temptation. And the second thing is that Jesus, as the faithful Son of God, he is also demonstrating his humanity. And in this way, he identifies himself with our suffering. And he suffers in our place. As a matter of fact, we can say that, on the contrary, we cannot say Jesus doesn't know my suffering. Jesus is God. He doesn't know my suffering. He didn't go through this. On the contrary, we can say, I never suffered like Jesus. Jesus' suffering was, as the Son of God, was even greater than the sufferings that we go through. This not only gives us credibility to his preaching, ministry, his sacrifice, but also offers us an example in how to deal with our wilderness experiences. Some suggest that we should distinguish these experiences, or we should distinguish temptation from trials. Some even say, well, Jesus wasn't actually tempted. This was sort of a trial, a hard time he went through, although the word really suggests temptation. But the letter of James, chapter 1, verse 12 and on, says the following: Blessed is anyone who endures temptation. Such a one has stood, the test, and will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. No one, when tempted, should say, I'm being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself tempts no one. But one is tempted by one's own desire, being lured and enticed by it. Then, when that desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And that sin, when it's fully grown, gives birth to death. Of course, James is calling our attention to the fact that many times we are tempted by our own sins, by our own choices, by our own wrongdoings. This is what causes many times our suffering. And Jesus wasn't being tempted by his own choices or wrongdoings. He was being tested by God and, and showed his faithfulness. Contrary to God's people in the Old Testament, who failed in the test, wilderness. In a sense, this temptation was unique to Jesus. Although it evokes Israel's experience in the past, but it's unique to Jesus. No one has gone through his temptation, or even later, like Jesus suffered on the cross. But in another sense, this temptation also teaches us how to deal with our own trials. In our wilderness and desert experience, we're tested. We're tested on our trust in God, or even whether God cares. And ultimately, like I said, our relationship with God is tested. Are you the son of God? Are you a daughter of God? Do you really trust this God? Do you really believe this God? So, why doesn't he do something? Why does he let you stay or be in this situation? But as Jesus, we need to respond with firmness in our trust in God and our trust in his promises as we see and hear in Scriptures. I wait that day that the Lord may bless us and we may continue trusting him through our wilderness experiences. Amen.